普总统是家大业大的优秀企业家，擅长创造不动产价值，以及运用心理战术为自己累积财富。虽然他深谙投资之道，但是术业有专攻，面对不同产业，即使运用心理战术可以达成某种目的，但要落实到赚钱的目标时，恐怕还是两回事。
In particular, in the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. The only way you'll get out of this is to build your plant. If you want to stop paying the taxes or the tariffs, you have to build your plant right here in America.
Donald Trump has once again threatened tariffs against trading partners of the United States. This time he's vowing 25% tariffs on automobiles, semiconductors, and pharmaceutical drugs coming into the United States. But the market reaction has been muted.
Right now, we could see some more possible deal activity. This was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, which did claim that Broadcom as well as Taiwan Semiconductor are looking separately at deals for various parts of Intel's business. I think this is interesting, though, the way that an entity of Intel this is, again, fairly early talks. This hasn't been confirmed by other companies, but the way they're selling it for parts at this point shows the demise of Intel.
So yeah, still a lot remains unclear right now, but certainly this has been a real drag on Intel for quite an extended period of time. Obviously, the previous CEO invested heavily in the foundry business, billions of dollars, didn't really see too much of a return on that. It is well behind TSMC and Samsung. So people are really looking to see if there is any kind of, sort of rescue for the foundry business that is really expected to, really support Intel if there is some kind of deal coming to fruition.
Ryan, what would be left of Intel if TSMC and Broadcom were to succeed in this, as reported by the Journal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, so many details are still up in the air, not yet confirmed. I mean, there is such a focus on domestic manufacturing. Intel got a lot of money from the CHIPS Act. It was building out a factory in Ohio, for example. So there is certainly a geopolitical aspect to this. People want to see more domestic chip manufacturing. And if TSMC is able to work with Intel in some capacity, obviously that would probably be good for TSMC to have more of a domestic presence here. Certainly good for Intel. But again, we really don't know what any of this is going to end up looking like if anything does come to fruition.
这几年在媒体的传播下，全世界都知道半导体源自于美国的贝尔实验室，最早的用途是在军事方面。虽然是很重要的发明，但是生产的过程并不容易，而且商用价值在当时还没有完全被开发出来，所以半导体事业根本不像今日大家所见的，是一个闪着金光、人人抢着做的好生意。然而不可讳言的，在半导体崛起的历程里，英特尔的确是占有一席之地。它曾经是全球半导体制造的霸主，特别是在个人电脑 PC 与伺服器 CPU 的领域里，它呼风唤雨，掌握了重要的生产技术。可如今它的没落，除了是受到错误布局所导致之外，更重要的是它离能耗越来越远。
Intel has been falling behind their competitors for decades, despite creating the world's first commercial microprocessor chip, the Intel 4004, along with a long list of breakthroughs. They completely ignored the boom of smartphones, and even when Steve Jobs offered them the chance to make chips for the iPhone, they declined. According to them, the margins were too small. But that's not all. They also totally underestimated GPUs, thinking they were a niche product for gaming and instead focused on CPUs. Needless to say, with crypto mining and especially AI, they were very, very wrong. They also completely underestimated AMD's comeback with Ryzen. So why the lack of foresight? Well, Intel slowly became complacent. They were such an integral part of PCs with their deal with Microsoft Windows, aka Wintel. They made billions from this, but this also made them blindsided when PC sales began to slow in the 2010s. Gelsinger was betting big on something called foundries. These are massive manufacturing plants where microchips are manufactured. Chipmakers like Nvidia and AMD design their own microchips, but they outsource their production. Intel, however, designs and produces their own chips, and now they were going to massively expand this production. Why? Well, when you look at the benefits, it makes a lot of sense. With Intel falling behind, they needed a huge way to catch up, specifically to TSMC. TSMC is a gigantic chip producer based in Taiwan, which holds over 50% of the global foundry market. In fact, they just recently crossed a $1 trillion market cap. But TSMC was unique. They didn't design their own chips. They only produced chips for others like Nvidia or Apple. There are very few options for foundries, and pretty much everyone relies on TSMC in some capacity. They made the most advanced chips, yet Intel, who only made their own chips, were falling far behind. One of the most important factors of a semiconductor is its process size. The smaller the process, the more transistors can fit on a microchip. More transistors means faster speed and less power used. In the 2010s, Intel announced a massive breakthrough. Their chips were going to have 10nm process nodes, and they were going to be ready in 2016. Extremely impressive, but there was a problem. A few years went by and the semiconductors were nowhere to be seen. There was delay after delay. Despite Intel's aggressive plans, they hadn't laid the groundwork and were trying to shrink the semiconductors with the same old technology. The revolutionary 10nm chips would eventually be pushed back to 2019. This would have been impressive in 2016, but keep in mind, Intel isn't the only one making semiconductors. By 2019, this breakthrough was already out of date, but it gets even worse.
根据 SEMI 国际半导体产业协会提供的数据来看，从2019年到2023年，5年的时间里，全球新建的半导体晶圆厂数量就已经超过100座，而在2023年到2025年期间，预计会有多达97座新建的高产能晶圆厂正式进入投产，这当中包括2024年启用的48座。和2025年启用的32座厂房。那为什么我们需要这么多的半导体晶圆厂？原因就在科技的进步。当我们日常使用的东西都离不开电，当电流所到之处几乎都需要电源晶片的时候，这个数量就相当惊人。而2020年到2023年发生的全球晶片危机，更是让各国领袖意识到，这小小一片晶片对国力造成的杀伤力根本无法想象。根据高盛分析，当时全球至少有169个行业受到晶片危机的影响，其中2021年晶片短缺还造成全球汽车产业高达2100亿元的损失。就连2022年还在担任白宫首席经济顾问的 Brian Dees 都曾对媒体表示，晶片短缺预估导致美国2021年国内生产总值 GDP 短少1个百分点。
It's not an overstatement to say that semiconductors power the modern world. They're not only a key component of nearly every electronic device we buy and use, they also power the factories that make the electronic devices we buy and use. They power our laptops, our cell phones, our cars, our washing machines, our refrigerators. Yeah, even our refrigerators. And this is just the stuff in our home. We're not even getting into all the ways semiconductors are important to the military and to the power grid.
If software is eating the world, then the chips are the teeth.
And now there aren't enough of them getting made, a massive global shortage. And it's getting so bad that General Motors, one of the world's largest automakers, said it could lose up to $2 billion because the semiconductor chip shortage forced it to temporarily shut down some auto manufacturing plants.
People are adjusting their business to, counter the situation. If you look at auto production, it's very global. So there is, a certain facility that may be slowing down. Maybe it's at the expense of another facility that's actually continuing to produce. And for automaker, when they look at their business, it's, for the global automakers at least, it's global in nature. So reallocating my supply from, one facility to another facility is perhaps the kind of the logical solution. Given the circumstance.
Today's vehicles need chips for nearly everything. Engine control units, transmission control, brakes, steering, infotainment systems, and safety tech.
In short, no computer chips, no new cars. Now, many of the dealerships who I spoke with in the area say their new car stock has gone down dramatically over the last few months. In fact, some manufacturers have been hit harder than others.
The crunch, which began in late 2020, has forced car makers like Ford, General Motors, Hyundai, and Volkswagen to slow production. Ford, for example, is predicting that the shortage of chips will result in a $2.5 billion fall in profits. And tech companies like Apple have reportedly postponed manufacturing some laptops and iPads due to the chip shortage. The question then is, why can't we just make more chips? First, it will cost billions of dollars. It will also take a few years to build and outfit a single factory capable of making semiconductors.
In terms of chip manufacturers trying to basically raise production capacity, movements from governments also to basically secure also production capacity nationally. But nevertheless, this is something that we're in to see for at least 3 more quarters at least.
Some 80% of the world's semiconductors are manufactured in Asia, with Taiwan's TSMC dominating the market for contract chip manufacturing. This has forced both the US and the EU to search for ways to decrease their reliance on Asia. One solution is to expand their domestic semiconductor manufacturing capacity.
For decades, the auto industry has really kind of perfected this just-in-time model where components arrive at the factory and even right at the assembly line just as they're needed. That allows them to lower their inventory costs, and there's a lot of efficiencies that go with that.
But the chip shortage has shown this model breaks down during a global crisis like the pandemic.
Companies are looking at moving to stockpiling really crucial computer chips. There's been direct outreach from, auto executives to chip suppliers, which, hadn't been happening in the past.
And auto companies not only want more visibility in the supply chain, but also more direct control.
Some of the companies have talked about even getting more involved in designing their own chips, designing components to need fewer chips. I know Ford specifically has talked about that.
It's time to get more aggressive. The situation is not getting better. In some ways, it's getting worse.
This is how the U.S. Commerce Secretary has responded to the worsening semiconductor chip shortage that has caused automakers to cut production and impacted thousands of workers. The shortage of computer chips is increasing the price of new and used cars in the U.S. and holding back economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. According to consulting firm Alex Partners, the shortage is now expected to cost the global automotive industry $210 billion in revenue in 2021. That is nearly double the $110 billion projected in May.
全球晶片生产运动是一个必然发生的事情，但不是每一项产品都需要用到先进制程的晶片等级。在过去几年发生的全球车用晶片大短缺事件里，可以看到汽车业使用的晶片只有一小部分需要用到先进制程。其他有很大一部分的晶片使用较高的成熟制程就可以。至于目前全球疯抢台积电设厂，着眼的则是不久之后可能喷发的人工智能商机，以及台积电的独门绝活。放眼全球，台积电的3奈米技术率先以高良率实现大量生产，这门绝技让其他同业望尘莫及。
Since the 1980s, the United States and Europe have been off-shipping the production of electronic chips.
The globalization trend was driven by differentials in labor costs. It was simply cheaper to hire workers.
Aware of their dependence, Americans and Europeans are facing a race against time to produce their own chips.
They're building the biggest plant they've ever built in the world here in Arizona. 18 months ago, it was desert.
The country that produces microprocessors will thus control the global industry.
The world's geopolitics has been defined by where the oil reserves are for the last 5 decades. And I think where the chips come from is more important for the next 5 decades.
From Taiwan to the far reaches of America, microprocessors are now coveted by the major world powers.
Taiwan saw the potential in chipmaking early in the game, investing billions back in the 1980s. TSMC pioneered the business of producing the chips instead of designing them. That focus on manufacturing gave it a scale nobody could match.
Despite being the birthplace of microchips in the 1950s and remaining a top chip design hub, the US now manufactures only 10% of the world's chips and none of the most advanced ones. When supply chain chaos collided with booming demand for consumer electronics during the pandemic, the resulting chip shortage exposed the big risks of relying on outsiders for such critical technology.
How important is it for supply to come from elsewhere than just Taiwan?
I think the pandemic is probably a good example that highlighted supply chain diversification requirements. And customers want us in the US, they want us in Japan, they want us in Europe.
The world's massive reliance on TSMC's fabs in Taiwan has made the global chip supply vulnerable to risks of the region.
We can't be sure that we can make enough chips here in the US in the event of, say, some sort of aggression between China and Taiwan, some sort of even earthquakes and events that take down that particular island for a period of time. The entire market, the entire world could suffer from lack of availability of leading edge nodes.
For decades, Taiwan has been synonymous with cutting-edge chip manufacturing, thanks largely to TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. With its unmatched precision in producing advanced nodes like 3nm and 5nm chips, TSMC has become the backbone of everything from smartphones to data centers. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and AMD rely heavily on Taiwanese fabs to bring their designs to life.
TSMC is extraordinarily difficult to replicate. A single new chip-making facility can cost $20 billion. They're the most expensive factories in human history, and so simply finding the funds to build a new chip plant is itself an extraordinary challenge. There's no plausible scenario under which Taiwan isn't an absolutely central player. Even under the most dramatic scenarios of de-risking, the reality is that the entire world, including the United States, will be highly reliant on Taiwan for a very long time to come.
The fight to control the chip supply chain has only just begun. The bottom line is that while it may be easy to take the chips out of Taiwan, it's hard to take Taiwan out of the chips.
这场全球半导体产业之争，台面上除了各国争抢台积电非常精彩之外，台面下受到美中科技战影响，一场专利大战也让不少国家倍感压力。根据智慧财产权公司公布的数据指出，近年来全球半导体专利申请量持续激增，从2022年的66416件提升到了2023年的80892件，同比增长22%。其中，中国的半导体申请量从32840件激增至46591件，增幅高达42%，超过其他所有地区。虽说是随着生成式人工智慧的兴起，对高效能晶片的需求不断增长，各国晶片制造商都在积极研发相关技术，并争相申请专利所致。但是中国半导体专利申请量激增，某种程度也是反映了中国正在努力实现半导体领域的技术突破与创新，为半导体的自给自足提供技术支援。可以预见的是，未来美中之间的半导体竞争将会愈演愈烈。当越来越多半导体生产技术变成独家专利的时候，想在广大的晶片市场捞金，门槛只会越来越高不可攀。